4 years of silence had earned Leo, the son of Alpha Silas Blackwood, a cruel title, the Unlovable Prince. Born of tragedy and motherless since birth, the boy didn't just reject nannies, he destroyed them, while the country's highest-ranking she-wolves lined up to tame him, desperate for a shot at becoming the next Luna. Every single one left broken, bleeding, or fired. Silas was on the verge of locking the boy away for good until a starving, abused Omega named Sophie entered with a mop and bucket. She was an invisible janitor who wasn't supposed to look at the Alpha, let alone interact with his heir. Yet, she became the only person in the world capable of making the Silent Prince open his mouth to whisper the single word that would bring the kingdom to its knees. Mom. The Silvercrest Pack house wasn't just a home. It was a fortress of glass and steel hidden deep within the Colorado mountains. To the outside human world, it was the private estate of Silas Blackwood, a tech mogul and venture capitalist. To the Pack, it was the seat of the Alpha King. And on this rainy Tuesday in November, it felt less like a palace and more like a prison. Her name was Sophie Miller. She wasn't important. In the hierarchy of Silvercrest, she was lower than the dirt on the Alpha's boots. She was an Omega without a family, an orphan taken in by the Pack not out of charity, but out of a need for free labor. Sophie was 22, but she looked older, worn down by 18-hour shifts, scrubbing the grand hallways and enduring the sharp tongues of the higher-ranking wolves. "Sophie, you missed a spot on the staircase." That screech belonged to head maid Beatrice. She was a woman who derived a sick amount of pleasure from Sophie's misery. She pointed a manicured finger at a microscopic smudge on the marble. "I'm sorry, Beatrice," Sophie murmured, keeping her head down. Eye contact was forbidden. "I'll fix it." "You'd better," Beatrice hissed, leaning in close so Sophie could smell her cloying, expensive perfume. "Because today is the selection, and if Alpha Silas sees a single speck of dust while he's interviewing the new candidates for young Master Leo, it won't be me who gets punished. It'll be you sleeping in the stables again. The stables. It was freezing out there, and the horses were kinder than the people inside the house. The selection was a monthly ritual of humiliation. Alpha Silas Blackwood was the most powerful wolf on the continent, but he had a fatal weakness. His 4-year-old son, Leo. Leo's mother had died during childbirth, a tragedy that turned Silas from a benevolent leader into a cold, ruthless tyrant. He ruled with efficiency, but his heart was dead. And Leo? Leo was a terror. The rumors said the boy was feral. He bit, he screamed, he broke heirlooms worth millions, but worst of all, he never spoke. Not a word. Not a sound. Just growls. Sophie finished scrubbing the spot, her hands raw from the harsh chemicals. Beatrice didn't allow her to wear gloves. She said they were a waste of budget for an Omega. As she gathered her supplies, the heavy oak doors at the top of the stairs burst open. The atmosphere in the house shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, charged with a dominating static that made the hair on Sophie's arms stand up. Alpha Silas was home. She scrambled to the side, pressing her back against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. He strode in, flanked by his beta, a man named Sterling. Silas Blackwood was terrifyingly handsome, dark hair, piercing grey eyes, and a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite. But he looked exhausted. His tailored Italian suit was immaculate, but his eyes held the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. "Where is he?" Silas asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "In the library, Alpha," Sterling replied, checking a tablet. He bit the last candidate, Miss Tiffany. Her father is threatening a lawsuit." Silas let out a dark, humorless laugh. "Pay them off. Double the settlement. Just get them off my property. Who is next?" "We have 5 candidates today," Alpha, including Jessica Price. Sophie flinched at the name. Jessica Price. She was the daughter of the Gamma, a stunningly beautiful woman with blonde hair and a smile that could cut glass. She was also the cruelest person Sophie had ever met. She had been the one who convinced Beatrice to cut Sophie's rations last winter to help her lose weight. Jessica, Silas sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine. Bring them in. I don't care who it is, Sterling. I just need someone who can stop my son from tearing this house apart. I have a merger with the European Pax in 2 weeks. If I don't have a stable heir by then, they'll see it as weakness. They walked past her. Silas didn't even glance in Sophie's direction. To him, she was just part of the furniture. But as they passed, she smelled it, the scent of distress. Not from the Alpha, but coming from the library down the hall. A scent of pure, childish panic. She shouldn't have cared. She had her own problems, but her wolf, weak as she was, whined inside her. The pup is hurting. Get back to work, trash, Beatrice snapped, appearing out of nowhere and shoving a bucket into Sophie's chest. The library bathroom needs cleaning before the interviews start. Go through the back service entrance. If you make a sound, I'll have you whipped. Sophie nodded, gripping the bucket. She had to go into the lion's den. The library of the Blackwood estate was a masterpiece. 2 stories of books, a roaring fireplace, and velvet curtains. But today, it felt like a courtroom. Sophie slipped in through the hidden servant's door in the corner, moving silently into the small attached bathroom. She left the door cracked just an inch, a dangerous habit, but she couldn't help it. She needed to see him. Leo was sitting in the middle of the room on a Persian rug, surrounded by expensive toys he refused to touch. He was small for his age, with messy dark curls and big wide eyes that looked too old for his face. He was rocking back and forth, clutching a tattered blanket. Silas sat in a high-back leather chair, looking like a king passing judgment. Send in the first one. The first 3 interviews were a disaster. One woman tried to use a high-pitched baby voice that made Leo cover his ears and scream silently until his face turned red. Silas dismissed her in under 2 minutes. The second woman, a stern matron with a degree in child psychology, tried to approach Leo with a clipboard. Leo threw a wooden block at her head with surprising accuracy. She left cursing. The third woman tried to use her alpha command on him. Silas nearly ripped her throat out for daring to use a command voice on his son. Then it was Jessica Price's turn. Sophie watched through the crack in the door as Jessica sashayed into the room. She was wearing a dress that was technically modest, but fit her so tightly it left little to the imagination. She ignored Leo completely at first, walking straight to Silas. Alpha, she purred, dipping her head in a perfect, practiced display of submission. It breaks my heart to see you so stressed. You need a woman's touch in this house. Not just for the boy, but for everything. Silas didn't take the bait. He looked bored. The boy, Jessica. Focus on the boy. Jessica turned to Leo, her smile tightening. She didn't like children. Everyone knew that. She wanted the title of Luna. The kid was just an obstacle. She walked over to Leo, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood. She knelt down, but she didn't get on his level. She hovered over him. "Hello, little prince," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She reached out to touch his hair. Leo recoiled, scrambling backward on the rug. He let out a low, warning growl. It sounded almost animalistic. Now, Jessica said, her voice hardening slightly. Don't be a brat. I'm going to be your new mommy, and we are going to have to learn some manners. She grabbed his arm, her grip visibly too tight. Leo panicked. He didn't just pull away. He lunged. He sank his small milk teeth into Jessica's forearm. "Ah!" Jessica shrieked, slapping the boy away. It happened in slow motion. The slap wasn't hard enough to injure him seriously, but the sound of her hand hitting his cheek echoed through the silent library. Silas was out of his chair instantly, a roar building in his chest, but before he could move, Sophie was there. She didn't think. She didn't plan. Her body moved before her brain could stop it. Sophie burst out of the bathroom, dropping her mop bucket with a loud clatter. Water spilled everywhere. "Don't you touch him!" she screamed. Silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. Jessica froze, holding her arm. Silas stopped mid-stride, his eyes widening in shock. No Omega had ever raised their voice in this room. Sophie fell to her knees, sliding on the wet floor until she was between Jessica and Leo. She shielded the boy with her body, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. She knew she was going to die. She was going to be executed for insubordination. "You filthy little rat!" Jessica hissed, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you interrupt? Alpha, this janitor just attacked me!" Silas didn't look at Jessica. He was looking at Sophie. His gaze was intense, analyzing every inch of her shaking form. "Get up," he commanded. His voice wasn't angry, just icy. Sophie couldn't move. She felt small hands gripping the back of her uniform. "Leo." He was hiding behind her. I said, "Get up," Silas repeated, stepping closer. She slowly rose to her feet, keeping her eyes on the floor. "I'm sorry, Alpha. I'm so sorry. She hit him. "He bit me," Jessica screeched, thrusting her arm out. There was a tiny red mark, barely a scratch. "That child is a monster. He needs discipline, not coddling by a servant." Silas turned his head slowly toward Jessica. "You struck my son." It was a reflex. He's dangerous," Jessica stammered, realizing her mistake. "Get out," Silas said softly. "But Alpha, get out!" The roar shook the windows. Jessica turned pale and fled the room, her heels clicking frantically. Now it was just Sophie, the Alpha King, and the broken boy. Silas turned back to her. The anger in his eyes was fading, replaced by confusion. "You're the cleaner." "Sophie, is it?" She nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "Yes, Alpha." "You should be punished for bursting in here," he said, taking a step closer. The power radiating off him was suffocating. "But look." He pointed behind her. Sophie turned around. Leo hadn't run away to his corner. He was standing right behind her, clutching the fabric of her cheap grey uniform pants. He wasn't growling. He wasn't rocking. He was looking up at her with those big, dark eyes, and for the first time in years, they weren't filled with fear. They were filled with recognition. She didn't know what to do. Her instincts took over again. Sophie slowly crouched down, ignoring the Alpha looming over them. She didn't reach for Leo. She just held out her hand, palm up, steady and quiet. "It's okay," she whispered, keeping her voice low and rough. "She's gone. You're safe." Leo looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. He took a step forward. He sniffed the air, sniffing her. She smelled like lemon cleaner and bleach, nothing like the expensive perfumes of the other women. Then he did something that made Silas gasp. Leo stepped into her arms. He wrapped his tiny arms around her neck and buried his face in her shoulder. He let out a long, shuddering breath, his entire small body relaxing against her. Sophie froze, holding him gingerly. She looked up at Silas. The Alpha looked like he had been struck by lightning. He was staring at his son, his mouth slightly open. He hasn't let anyone hold him since Victoria died," Silas whispered, his voice breaking. The room was so quiet they could hear the rain hitting the glass. Leo pulled back slightly, just enough to look Sophie in the eyes. His small hand came up and touched her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. He opened his mouth. His voice was rusty from disuse, crackly and small. "Mom." The word hung in the air like a spell. Sophie's heart stopped. Silas's eyes went wide. "No, sweetie," she whispered, panic rising in her chest. I'm just Sophie." Leo shook his head stubbornly. He pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "Mum," he said again, firmer this time. Silas took a step back, running a hand through his hair. He looked from the Omega to the boy, his calculation shifting. He wasn't looking at a cleaner anymore. He was looking at the only solution to his problem. "Sterling," Silas shouted, not taking his eyes off her. The beta rushed in. "Alpha! Cancel the rest of the interviews," Silas said, his voice hard and final. "But Alpha, we have the senator's daughter next." "I said cancel them," Silas barked. He pointed at Sophie. "Pack her things. Move her out of the servants' quarters." Where am I going?" she asked, her voice trembling, still holding the boy. Silas looked her dead in the eye. "You're moving into the suite next to the nursery. You're the new nanny." "But Alpha," Sterling interjected, looking at her dirty uniform with disgust. "She's an Omega. She has no training. She's nobody." Silas looked at his son, who was clinging to Sophie as if she were his lifeline. "She's the only one he chose," Silas said, "and if anyone treats her like a servant again, they answer to me." Moving from the servants' quarters to the East Wing wasn't a promotion for Sophie. It was a target on her back. Her new room was larger than the entire orphanage she grew up in. It had a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, a private balcony overlooking the pine forests, and an attached bathroom with a tub deep enough to swim in. But she didn't sleep in the bed. For the first 3 nights, Sophie slept on the rug beside Leo's bed in the nursery next door. He wouldn't sleep unless he was holding her hand. If she tried to leave to go to the bathroom, he would wake up screaming, a blood-curdling sound that brought security running. So, she stayed. The dynamic in the house shifted violently. The other servants, people Sophie had worked alongside for years, now looked at her with a mixture of jealousy and hatred. She wasn't one of them anymore, but she wasn't one of the elite either. She was something in between, an anomaly. On the 4th morning, Sophie was in the kitchen trying to prepare Leo's oatmeal. The Alpha's chef, a pompous man named Gordon, usually refused to let Omegas touch his cookware, but he couldn't stop her. Alpha Silas's orders were absolute. Sophie feeds the boy. "Don't get comfortable, rat," a voice sneered from the pantry. It was Beatrice, the head maid. She looked tired. Rumor was that Silas had reprimanded her severely for the state of the house. Sophie didn't look up, focusing on slicing strawberries. "I'm just doing my job, Beatrice." "Your job?" She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you're special because the retard took a shine to you? You're a placeholder. Alpha Silas is meeting with the European delegation this Friday. Alpha Henri is bringing his daughter, Claudette. She's a pure-blood alpha female from Paris, educated, wealthy, and powerful." Beatrice stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Once Silas secures the merger, he'll need a real Luna, not a gutter wolf who smells like bleach. Enjoy the silk sheets while you can, Sophie. When they throw you out, I'll be waiting to put you back in the stables." Sophie's hand trembled, the knife slipping and nicking her finger. A drop of blood welled up. Beatrice smiled cruelly. "Careful. We wouldn't want to contaminate the young master's food with your filth." Sophie wanted to cry, but she swallowed the lump in her throat. She was right. Sophie was just a temporary fix. Later that afternoon, she took Leo to the private garden. It was the only place he seemed to relax. He was sitting in the grass, stacking pebbles. Sophie sat nearby, reading a book aloud. Not a children's book, but a gardening encyclopedia she found on the shelf. He seemed to like the rhythm of the Latin plant names. "You read well for an Omega." Sophie jumped. Alpha Silas was standing on the patio, watching them. He had shed his suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms covered in faint scars. He held a glass of whiskey, even though it was only 2 hours p.m. I went to school until I was 12, Alpha, she stammered, standing up quickly, before the system took me. Silas walked onto the grass. Leo didn't run away, which was a miracle, but he did scoot closer to Sophie's leg. Silas noticed the movement. A flash of pain crossed his eyes. "He trusts you," Silas said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Why?" "I don't know, Alpha. Don't lie to me." He stepped closer, his scent, cedar and rain, overwhelming her senses. "Did you use magic? A potion? Some Omega trick?" Sophie looked up at him, feeling a spark of anger. "I listened to him, that's all. Everyone else sees a broken air. I just saw a lonely little boy." Silas stared at her for a long moment. The air between them crackled. For a second, Sophie thought he might hit her for her insolence. Instead, he took a sip of his drink and looked away. "The European delegation arrives tomorrow," he said abruptly. "There is a gala dinner. You will attend." "Me?" "Alpha, I don't have anything to wear. I'm a nanny. You are the boy's handler. If he screams during the toast, the merger is dead. You will be there to keep him silent. Sterling has already purchased a dress for you. Do not embarrass me, Sophie. If Leo makes a scene, you're out on the street." He turned and walked back into the house, leaving her shivering in the sunlight. It was a test, and she had a terrible feeling she was designed to fail it. The dress was beautiful, which made it terrifying. It was a midnight blue silk gown that hugged Sophie's curves and flared at the bottom. Sterling had thrown it at her with a grimace, along with a pair of silver heels that pinched her toes. She felt like an imposter. The grand hall of the Silver Crest estate was transformed. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, and long tables were laden with roasted meats and wines that cost more than Sophie's life earnings. The room was filled with the elite of the werewolf world, alphas and betas from packs across America and Europe. Sophie stood in the corner, hidden by a large fern, holding Leo's hand. He was dressed in a tiny tuxedo, looking uncomfortable. "It's okay," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Just look at me. Ignore them." Silas was at the head table, looking regal and terrifying. Beside him sat Alpha Henri from France, a large man with a booming laugh, and his daughter, Claudette. Beatrice had been right. Claudette was stunning, tall, blonde, radiating power. She had her hand on Silas's arm, laughing at something he said. Silas wasn't pulling away. Sophie's chest tightened. She told herself it was just protectiveness over Leo. "Is that the child?" Alpha Henri asked loudly, the room quieting down. He pointed a thick finger at Leo. "The one with the condition." Silas stiffened. "My son is fine, Henri." "I heard he was feral." Henri chuckled, clearly drunk on power and wine. "A mute king cannot lead a pack, Silas. Perhaps it is time to consider a new heir. Claudette has excellent breeding hips." The insult was flagrant. The room went deadly silent. Silas gripped his wine glass so hard it shattered, red liquid staining the white tablecloth like blood. "Leo is my heir," Silas snarled, his voice dropping to that dangerous alpha timbre. "Prove it," Claudette interjected, her voice silky smooth. "Bring him here. Let him toast to the alliance. If he is an alpha, he can surely say, 'Cheers.'" It was a trap. They knew he couldn't speak. If Silas refused, he looked weak. If he agreed, Leo would fail. Silas looked at Sophie across the room. His eyes were desperate. "Do something," they seemed to say. Sophie knelt down to Leo. "Leo, baby," she whispered. "Do you see that man? The loud one? He thinks you're scared." Leo frowned, his brow furrowing. "You're not scared, are you?" she asked. "You're an alpha." Leo shook his head. No. Go show him. She nudged him gently. Leo let go of her hand. The entire room watched as the small 4-year-old walked across the marble floor. He looked tiny against the towering adults. He walked straight up to the head table. Claudette smirked. Well, speak up, little puppy. Leo didn't speak. He reached onto the table, grabbed his father's heavy silver steak knife, and slammed it into the table, right between Alpha Henri's fingers. Thunk. The blade vibrated. Henri jerked his hand back, eyes wide. Leo climbed up onto the empty chair next to Silas, stood on it, looked Henri dead in the eye, and let out a growl. It wasn't a child's tantrum. It was a deep, resonating sound that came from his chest. A pure alpha challenge. The room gasped. He has the spirit, Henri stuttered, looking pale. By the moon! Leo didn't stop there. He pointed at Sophie, then pointed at the empty chair beside him. Silas looked at his son, then at the Omega. He understood. Leo wasn't just challenging Henri, he was claiming his pack, and his pack included her. Sophie, Silas called out, his voice ringing clear. Join us. She froze. A servant sitting at the head table? It was unheard of, but the Alpha had commanded. Sophie walked forward, her legs shaking. She sat in the chair Leo indicated. Leo immediately hopped off his chair, climbed into her lap, and buried his face in her neck, exhausted by his display of dominance. Claudette looked furious. Silas, surely you aren't going to let the nanny sit with the delegation. She's an Omega. Silas looked at Claudette, then at Leo, sleeping in Sophie's arms. A rare, genuine softness touched his face. She is not just a nanny, Silas said, raising a fresh glass of wine. She is the only one who can tame the lion. To the merger. The dinner continued, but the dynamic had changed. Sophie wasn't invisible anymore. She was the woman holding the air. And from across the room, she saw Jessica Price watching her. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was smiling, a cold, calculating smile that promised violence. The high of the gala lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, chaos erupted. Sophie was woken up by the sound of her door being kicked open. Get up! It was Sterling, the beta. Behind him were 2 security guards and a very smug-looking Jessica Price. Sophie sat up, clutching the duvet to her chest. What? What's happening? Don't play innocent, Sterling spat. He looked disappointed. I actually started to trust you after last night. Silas trusted you. I don't understand, she cried. Lady Claudette's diamond necklace is missing, Jessica said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. It was in her guest suite. We've searched the whole house. The only place left is... Here. I didn't take anything. Search the room, Sterling ordered. The guards tore the room apart. They ripped the sheets off the bed, dumped Sophie's drawers on the floor, and overturned the mattress. Found it, a guard said. He reached into her pillowcase and pulled out a shimmering necklace of diamonds and sapphires. Sophie's blood ran cold. No, that's not mine. I've never seen that before. Save it for the Alpha, Sterling said grimly. 2 guards grabbed her arms, hauling her out of bed in her pajamas. They dragged her down the hallway. Leo heard the commotion. He ran out of the nursery, screaming a high-pitched wail. He tried to run to Sophie, but Jessica stepped in his path, blocking him. No, Leo, Sophie screamed as they dragged her away. Stay there! They threw her into the Alpha's office. Silas was standing by the window, his back to them. The necklace lay on his desk. Silas, please, Sophie begged, falling to her knees. I didn't take it. You have to believe me. Why would I steal? I have everything I need here. Silas turned around. His eyes were black. His wolf was close to the surface. My mother gave me a piece of advice once. Never trust a starving dog around a full plate. I gave you a home. I gave you status. And you steal from my guests? Do you know the humiliation you've caused me? I was framed, she sobbed. Jessica, Jessica is the Gamma's daughter, Silas roared, slamming his fist on the desk. You are a nobody. Why should I take your word over hers? He looked shattered. It wasn't just about a necklace. It was about betrayal. Everyone in his life had left him or hurt him. He had started to let Sophie in, and now the evidence said she was just another user. Get her out of my sight, Silas whispered. Throw her off the territory. If she returns, kill her. Silas, please, Leo needs me. Leo will forget you, he shouted. Take her. The guards dragged her out the back door. It was raining again. They didn't stop at the gate. They drove her 5 miles to the border of the Packlands and threw her out of the SUV into the mud. You're a rogue now, Sophie, Sterling said, tossing a small bag of her old clothes at her. Start running. She lay in the mud as the tail lights faded into the distance. She was alone. She had no money, no pack, and no protection. But Sophie wasn't just crying for herself. She was crying for Leo. Back at the mansion, the silence was deafening. Silas sat in his office, staring at the necklace. He felt sick. He wanted to be right. He wanted to believe her. But the proof was irrefutable. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Silas looked up, expecting Sterling. It was Leo. The boy was red-faced, snot running down his nose, holding a tablet. It was the iPad he used to watch cartoons. Go to bed, Leo, Silas said wearily. Sophie is gone. Leo shook his head violently. He ran to the desk and slammed the iPad down in front of his father. What is this? Silas asked. Leo tapped the screen. It was a video recording. Silas frowned and pressed play. The angle was low, filmed from under the bed in Sophie's room. Leo must have been playing hide-and-seek with the iPad recording, a game they played often. On the screen, the room was empty. Then the door opened. Sophie wasn't there. Jessica walked in. She looked around, checked the hallway, and then quickly pulled something from her pocket. The diamond necklace. She stuffed it into Sophie's pillowcase, smirked at her reflection in the mirror, and walked out. The video ended. Silas stared at the screen. The air in the room dropped 20 degrees. The glass of whiskey on his desk cracked and shattered from the sheer force of the aura exploding from his body. He had thrown an innocent woman, the woman who saved his son, out into the rogue-infested woods at night. He looked at Leo. Leo glared at his father with pure hatred. Find her, Leo rasped. His second sentence. Bring Mum back. Silas didn't wait for his guards. He didn't call Sterling. He shifted. Bones cracked and reshaped as a massive, midnight black wolf stood in the office. He leaped through the closed window, shattering the glass, and sprinted toward the forest, howling a sound of pure regret and rage. He had to find her before the rogues did. The forest at night was a living, breathing monster. Sophie had been walking for what felt like hours, but according to the moon, it had only been 40 minutes since Sterling threw her out of the SUV. The rain had turned to sleet, coating the pine needles in a slick layer of ice. Her thin pajamas were soaked through, clinging to her skin like a second, freezing layer. She was numb. Her feet, bare and bleeding from the rocks, couldn't feel the ground anymore. She wasn't running just from the cold. She was running from the scent. Rotten meat and sulfur. Rogues. Sophie stumbled over a tree root and crashed hard into the mud, biting her tongue. She tasted copper. As she tried to push herself up, a twig snapped loudly to her left. Well, look what the Alpha tossed out with the trash. She froze. Emerging from the shadows were 3 men. They didn't look like the noble wolves of Silvercrest. They were gaunt, dirty, their eyes yellow with madness. Rogues. Wolves who had lost their humanity. The leader, a man with a jagged scar running down his throat, stepped forward. He sniffed the air. She smells like the Pack house. High quality. Please, Sophie whispered, backing up until her spine hit the rough bark of a pine tree. I have nothing. I was banished. We know. The scarred man grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "We were told you'd be coming. In fact, we were paid a bonus to make sure you didn't survive the night." Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. Paid? Jessica. She hadn't just framed her. She had put a hit out on her. She wanted to erase the evidence permanently. "Who paid you?" she demanded, finding a shred of courage in her anger. "Does it matter?" The man laughed. He began to shift, his bones cracking as fur sprouted from his skin. "Gamma's daughter pays well. That's all we care about." He lunged. Sophie screamed and curled into a ball, waiting for the teeth to tear into her neck. Roar! The sound wasn't a growl. It was an explosion of sound that shook the trees. A massive black blur slammed into the rogue midair, knocking him 20 feet away into a boulder with a sickening crunch. She looked up. Standing over her was a wolf the size of a bear. His fur was midnight black, his eyes glowing a furious crimson. The Alpha. Silas. He didn't look at Sophie. He was focused on the other two rogues. They were shaking, their tails tucked between their legs. They knew they were outmatched, but they were desperate. They attacked together. The fight was brutal and fast. Silas moved with a fluid, lethal grace. He caught one rogue by the neck, tossing him aside like a rag doll. But the third rogue, smaller and quicker, managed to sink his teeth into Silas's hind leg. Silas howled in pain, spinning around to snap his jaws shut on the rogue's spine. The rogue went limp. It was over in seconds. The forest was silent again, save for the heavy panting of the giant black wolf. Silas turned to Sophie. He limped slightly, blood dripping from his hind leg, staining the white snow red. He lowered his massive head, whining softly. "Silas," she whispered. He collapsed. The shift back to human form was messy and painful. A moment later, the Alpha King lay naked and shivering in the mud, a deep gash on his thigh bleeding profusely. "Sophie," he groaned, his voice weak. "Run. More might come." "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She ripped the hem of her pajama shirt, tearing a long strip of fabric. Sophie crawled over to him, ignoring the freezing mud. "This is going to hurt." She tied the makeshift tourniquet around his leg. He gritted his teeth, his face turning pale. "Why?" he rasped, looking up at her with feverish eyes. "I threw you out. I didn't believe you." "Because you're an idiot," she said, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "And because Leo needs his father." He reached up, his cold hand cupping her cheek. "He showed me. The video. I know, Sophie. I know everything." "We have to move," she said, pulling his arm over her shoulder. "We can't stay here. I saw a cave about half a mile back." Getting a 200-pound man through the woods in a snowstorm was the hardest thing she had ever done. Every step was agony, but she refused to let him fall. We made it to the small rocky overhang, just as the storm worsened. She huddled next to him, using her body heat to keep him from going into shock. He was burning up, the infection from the rogue's bite already setting in. "Sophie," he whispered in the dark. "If I don't make it back—" "Shut up," she snapped. "You're the Alpha King. You don't get to die in a hole." "If I don't, tell Leo I loved him. And tell the council, tell them Jessica is a traitor. She's working with the southern rogues to destabilize the pack." Sophie's blood ran cold. It wasn't just petty jealousy. It was a coup. "You can tell them yourself," she said, wrapping her arms tighter around him. They stayed like that for hours. Somewhere in the middle of the night, barely conscious, Silas pressed his forehead against hers. "I never wanted another Luna," he murmured. "I thought my heart died with Victoria. But it was you, Sophie. You woke me up." He kissed her then. It wasn't romantic or polished. It tasted of blood and rain and desperation. But it was the most real thing she had ever felt. "I'm going to fix this," he promised, his voice fading as he passed out from exhaustion. I'm going to burn their world down for touching you." The dawn that broke over the Silvercrest estate was grey and lifeless, matching the mood inside the great hall. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog that pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of confusion, fear, and suppressed ambition. The European delegation had not slept. Alpha Henri and his daughter, Claudette, sat in the front row of the impromptu assembly, whispering furiously in French. The Pack Council, 12 of the oldest, most influential wolves in the territory, sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces grim. They were waiting for news of a body, and standing at the front of the room, radiating a false, perfumed grief, was Jessica Price. She was dressed in a sleek black dress that was tasteful enough for a mourning period, but tight enough to remind everyone of her status. Beside her stood her father, the Gamma. He was a broad, sweating man who kept checking his gold watch, his eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors. "It is a tragedy beyond words," Jessica said, her voice trembling with a practiced sorrow. She held a lace handkerchief to dry eyes. Alpha Silas was unstable. The grief over his late wife, combined with the stress of the theft, it broke him. When he ran into the woods last night, he wasn't thinking like a king. He was thinking like a beast. "And the rogue activity?" Alpha Henri asked, his voice booming through the silent hall. "My security team reports scents of southern rogues near the border." "Exactly," Jessica nodded eagerly. "The woods are infested. If Silas went out there alone, in his state, we must prepare for the worst. We must think of the Pack's future. We must think of Leo." At the mention of his name, Leo, who was sitting with a temporary nanny in the corner, looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. He knew. Children always know when the adults are lying. "My father and I are prepared to step in as regents," Jessica continued, smoothing her dress. "We will take custody of the boy. We will ensure the merger with Europe goes ahead. We will bring stability back to Silvercrest." Gamma Richard stepped forward, raising his hands. "We should not delay. The Pack needs leadership. I propose we swear in the Regency Council immediately, before the panic spreads." One of the elders, a woman with steel-grey hair, frowned. "We have not found a body, Richard. We do not bury an alpha who might still be breathing." "He is gone, Elder," Jessica snapped, a flash of irritation breaking through her mask. "Face reality. He chased a thief into a blizzard. He is—" Boom! The sound wasn't a knock. It was the heavy, double oak doors being slammed open with such force that the hinges groaned in protest. The noise echoed like a gunshot, silencing every whisper, every breath in the room. The fog from outside swirled into the warm hall, curling around the feet of two figures standing in the threshold. The first was a monster of a man, Alpha Silas. He was shirtless, his torso smeared with mud and dried blood. A makeshift bandage, a strip of grey cloth, was tied tightly around his thigh, soaked through with fresh red. He was leaning heavily to his left, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying fire that made the wolves in the room whimper instinctively. And supporting him, acting as his crutch, was Sophie. She looked like a nightmare. Her pajamas were shredded, her feet were caked in black mud, and her hair was a tangled mess of pine needles and ice. She was shivering violently, but she kept her shoulder wedged firmly under the Alpha's arm. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was the pillar keeping the king standing. "Daddy!" The scream pierced the silence. Leo scrambled off his chair, dodging the grasping hands of the nanny, and sprinted across the polished marble floor. "Leo, wait!" Jessica shrieked, her composure cracking. Leo didn't listen. He crashed into their legs. Silas let out a groan of pain as the impact jarred his injury, but he didn't push the boy away. He released Sophie's shoulder for a split second to drop his hand onto Leo's head, gripping his son's hair as if to reassure himself the boy was real. "I am not gone," Silas rasped. His voice was broken, sounding like gravel grinding together, but it carried the undeniable weight of the Alpha command. Alpha, Sterling, the beta, rushed forward from the side of the room, his face pale with shock. "We thought—" The guard said, "Help him," Sophie ordered. Her voice was hoarse, but it cut through the air. "Get a medic, now." Sterling didn't question her. He didn't look at her rags. He signaled 2 enforcers, and they rushed to take Silas's weight, helping him limp toward the dais where his throne sat. Sophie followed close behind, Leo clutching her hand so tight his knuckles were white. Jessica and Gamma Richard stood frozen in the center of the room. They looked like ghosts. Richard's face had gone a sickly shade of grey. Jessica's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Silas collapsed into his throne. A medic immediately began cutting away the tourniquet Sophie had made, gasping at the sight of the infected bite mark. Silas waved him off, gripping the armrests of his chair until the wood creaked. He stared straight at the Gamma. "You look disappointed, Richard," Silas whispered. The room was so quiet that his whisper sounded like a shout. "Alpha, we are relieved," Richard stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. "We were just making plans for the worst-case scenario, to protect the pack." "To protect the pack?" Silas repeated. He looked at the Omega. "Sophie, come here." She walked up the steps of the dais. She felt every eye on her, the judgment of the elders, the sneer of Claudette, the confusion of the servants. But she didn't look down. Sophie stood at the right hand of the Alpha. "This woman," Silas said, gesturing to her, "dragged me 3 miles through a blizzard. She fought off the cold. She saved my leg. And do you know what she was doing out there?" He turned his gaze to Jessica. "She was running, because you threw her out." Jessica found her voice. She straightened her spine, playing her last card. "She is a thief, Alpha. She stole the Lady Claudette's necklace. We found it in her bed. You saw it yourself. You gave the order." "I did," Silas admitted. "I made a mistake that almost cost me everything." He turned to his beta. "Sterling. The screen." Sterling nodded grimly. He tapped his tablet, and the massive projection screen behind the throne flickered to life. It connected to the estate's secure server. "My son," Silas said, his voice softening as he looked at Leo, "is smarter than all of you. He likes to play hide-and-seek, and he likes to record his hiding spots." On the screen, a video began to play. The angle was low, shot from beneath a bed frame. It showed a pair of grey servant's shoes, Sophie's shoes, walking away. Then, the room was empty for a moment. The door opened again. High heels clicked on the floor. Jessica appeared on the screen. The date and time stamp in the corner proved it was yesterday morning, 10 minutes before the discovery. The entire great hall watched in stunned silence as Jessica Price, the highborn lady, checked the hallway, pulled the diamond necklace from her pocket, and shoved it roughly into Sophie's pillowcase. She stood up, smoothed her hair, and smiled a cold, ugly smile at her reflection in the mirror before leaving. The video ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Jessica took a step back, shaking her head. "No, that's faked. It's deep-fake technology. The Omega is manipulating you." "Is the bank faked too?" Sterling interrupted. He held up a file folder, his voice ringing with authority. "This morning, while the Alpha was missing, I ran a trace on the Gamma family accounts. 3 transfers, $50,000 each, sent to a shell corporation in Nevada." Sterling threw the file onto the floor at Richard's feet. The papers scattered. "That corporation," Sterling continued, "is a known front for the Red Tooth rogues. The same rogues who ambushed Alpha Silas in the woods last night. The gasp that tore through the room sucked the air out of the building. This wasn't just petty jealousy anymore. This was high treason. This was an assassination attempt. Alpha Henry stood up slowly, his face thunderous. You paid mercenaries to kill a king? To destabilize the region? He looked at Richard with pure disgust. You are a stain on our species. Gamma Richard panicked. He looked at the guards moving toward him, then at the elders. He pointed a shaking finger at his daughter. It was her! Richard screamed, his voice cracking. It was Jessica. She wanted to be Luna. She forced me to authorize the payments. She said if I didn't help her, she would tell everyone about my gambling debts. I had no choice. You liar, Jessica screeched, lunging at her father. She clawed at his face, her nails leaving red streaks. You devised the plan. You said Silas was weak. You said we could take the throne. Enough! Silas's command brought the brawling father and daughter to their knees. The alpha aura radiating from him was so potent it made the windows rattle. Guards, Silas said. Restrain them. Two enforcers grabbed Jessica and Richard, forcing them down onto the marble floor. They looked up at the dais, their faces masks of terror. The arrogance was gone. They were just wolves now, waiting for the slaughter. The penalty for treason is death, Silas said coldly. Public execution. Jessica began to sob, ugly, heaving sounds that echoed off the stone walls. Please, Silas, please, I grew up with you. We played together. Don't kill me. Silas didn't look at her. He looked at Sophie. He reached out and took her hand, her dirty, mud-stained hand, in his. Sophie, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear, though the room strained to listen. They tried to destroy you. They took your home, your reputation, and almost your life. The judgment is yours. Sophie looked at them. She looked at Jessica, the woman who had starved her, mocked her, and treated her like she was subhuman. She looked at Richard, a man who would kill his own leader for power. She felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. She wanted them to hurt. She wanted them to bleed. But then she felt Leo squeezing her other hand. Sophie looked down at him. He was watching her, his eyes wide and innocent. If she ordered their deaths, that would be the first thing he remembered about her as a mother figure. Blood. She took a deep breath, the smell of the pack filling her lungs. Death is too easy, she said. Her voice was steady. It's quick. It's an escape. Sophie stepped forward, looking down at Jessica. You wanted to be a queen, she told her. You thought you were better than everyone because of your bloodline. You thought people like me were invisible, disposal. She turned to Silas. Let them live. A murmur of confusion rippled through the council. Let them live, Sophie continued, but strip them. Strip their titles, seize their assets to pay for the damages to the pack, and send them to the Omega Quarter. Jessica's eyes went wide. No, she whispered. Anything but that. You will work, she said, her voice hardening. You will clean the toilets in the barracks. You will scrub the floors of the hospital. You will eat the leftovers from the mess hall. You will wear the grey uniform. You will serve the people you thought you were better than. She leaned in closer. And every time you scrub a stain off the floor, Jessica, you will remember that you are alive only because the filthy Omega allowed it. Silas looked at her. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a look of pride that transformed his features. You heard her, Silas announced to the room. Gamma Richard and Jessica Price are hereby stripped of rank. Take them to the laundry sector. Put a mop in their hands. As the guards dragged the screaming, protesting pair out of the hall, a heavy weight seemed to lift from the room. The poison was gone. Silas turned back to the crowd. He winced as he stood up, ignoring the medic's protests. He didn't let go of her hand. "There is one last matter," he said. He looked at Alpha Henri and Claudette. "The merger." Claudette stood up. She looked at Sophie up and down. Sophie expected an insult. Instead, Claudette bowed her head respectfully. "You have a strong mate, Alpha Silas," Claudette said. "She has the fire of a Luna. France accepts the alliance." Silas turned to Sophie. He ignored the hundreds of people watching. He dropped to his good knee, bringing himself to her eye level. "Sophie," he said softly, "I have been a blind fool. I let grief turn me into a tyrant. I let my house rot from the inside. But you walked into the darkness and lit a fire." He reached up and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt. "You are the only mother my son has ever chosen. And you are the only woman who has ever made my wolf feel peace." He pulled a ring from his pinky finger, the heavy, gold signet ring of the Blackwood pack. "I cannot offer you a perfect past," he said, "but I can offer you my future, my pack, my heart. Sophie Miller, will you be my Luna?" The world seemed to stop. She looked at the ring, then at Leo. The boy was practically vibrating with excitement. "Say yes!" Leo whispered loudly. Sophie laughed, a sound that felt like it broke the last of the tension in her chest. She looked at Silas, this broken, powerful, complicated man who was willing to kneel before a servant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alpha." Silas didn't just slide the ring onto her finger. He stood up, pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss like in the cave. It was a claim, a promise. It was the seal of a new era for Silver Crest. The room erupted. The applause was deafening, a roar of approval from the pack that shook the chandeliers. But Sophie didn't care about the noise. She looked down at Leo, who was hugging their legs, burying his face in her tattered pajamas. "Mum," he said, looking up with a toothy grin. She smiled back, tears finally spilling over. "I'm here, baby," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." And this time she knew it was forever. And that is the incredible true story of how a simple act of kindness from a nobody brought the most powerful Alpha King to his knees. It proves that rank, money, and power mean nothing compared to the heart of a true mother. Sophie went from scrubbing floors to ruling the pack, not because she was born to it, but because she earned it through love and bravery. If this story touched your heart, or if you think Jessica got exactly what she deserved, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were Sophie? Would you have forgiven Silas? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic wolf tale. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.